I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
The very first time I remember having any kind of conversation with my parents about the military was when I was probably just a young kid. It must have been late 60s, so probably, 4, 5, 6, 7, that time frame, or maybe early 70s. And my mom said to me, if we're still at war, this would be the Vietnam War, we're going to move to Canada because I don't want you to have to go into the military. So there was something kind of scary about war for obvious reasons, but also scary about being in the military, and that these were a situation you didn't want to be in. And of course, my perspectives have changed over time, but I realized that even today, there's probably a lot of misperceptions about ex-military and how they are as employees in companies. And my next guest and I talked about those misunderstandings and those perceptions. And I learned a lot that I just didn't realize, just how the ex-military are so well employed, even better than civilians, and what kind of value and strengths that they provide companies. It was really a wonderful, eye-opening conversation that we had. And I think that the other thing that I really learned here in this conversation is how much we can learn from each other, meaning the ex-military and the civilian employees within an organization. And that is sort of the bedrock of great teamwork and of great inclusion and of great mission focus, is to be able to learn from one another and to be able to take the team to the next level. The guest that I have is retired Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Lowrey Gallowitz. She grew up as a Navy brat, as she says, and served nearly 30 years as an Air Force officer. She is the founder and CEO of Vanguard, Veteran LLC, and author of a book called Beyond Thank You for Your Service, the Veteran Champion Handbook for Civilians, and has master's degree in nursing and political science. As an award-winning businesswoman with firsthand experience hiring veterans, Kathy coaches employers how to excel with hiring and retaining veteran talent in ways that strengthens their workforce. Her Veteran Talent Academy equips employers to find, hire, and leverage veterans' skill sets. Kathy also equips volunteer faith community leaders to build military ministries to cultivate mutual support, a sense of belonging, and spiritual resilience for military-connected people. Kathy Lowrey Gallowitz on the Business of Intuition. Kathy, nice to have you on the show.
Howdy. Great to be here.
Howdy.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about your work with veterans and getting them into organizations. And I wanted to ask you a leadoff question. Question is, what's the difference from a work ethic perspective of a veteran versus your typical non-veteran? Could you tell when the veteran comes to work, do they act, say, behave differently than any other employee?
Well, I answered that question with this morning. I was on a call, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, that's a novel idea. They show up to work on time." Now, I don't mean to be incredibly sarcastic, but yeah, there's certainly a difference.
But you were, but that's okay.
Yeah, there's certainly a difference in that, millions of dollars are put into training a civilian to become a warrior. And part of that training is to be disciplined, to respect hierarchy, to be a team player, and to respond quickly when needed, right? Okay. Right. And so, with that comes, if you show up on time, you're late, to be clear about direction, to take ownership of the mission and be very mission focused. I mean, there's a lot of cultural differences between military and civilian culture because of our training and because of what's at stake when you serve in uniform alongside your brothers and sisters. And, there's a great deal of bonding and a great deal of support for one another and a great deal of trust. And so when we come out of the military, we feel very, one veteran described it as, I feel like a foreigner who's moved into a foreign land with a foreign language and a foreign culture because of the distinctions and differences. Does that answer your question, Dean?
I think so. In a very nutshell way of summarizing this, it sounds like that you would say that a person who had been trained in the military is going to have a certain kind of respect for authority, for mission, responsiveness, and they're going to be on time for work. There's a sort of a work ethic, if you will, that one it could say in some cases we're missing some of that. Certainly as you start talking about different generations within an organization, you hear the older individuals, the Gen Xers, or maybe the baby boomers, if they're around, say that the work ethic is no longer here the way it was when I started work. And so you're sort of saying that the military person brings that back. We have that and we expect that. Is that kind of a good summation of what you said?
Military service strengthens those attributes. Absolutely. And not only work ethic, but servant leadership, mission focus. And research shows that that veterans are absent less than their non-veteran counterparts. So there's a lot of good news story in there.
I love it. So on the flip side, I wanted to ask you the question, what are some of the challenges that a military person has getting, I guess, included into that culture? I've heard it almost from a slight derogatory perspective. Well, she's ex-military.
Oh.
Well, he's ex-military. In fact, I was just talking to somebody today, and I don't think that the person was meaning to be derogatory, but they're basically said they're so hardcore and rigid that they're not agile. Is that a valid statement?
Well,
and then how do we help those military people become more agile?
Let's describe agile. Agile to me means that you can flex and bend with the demands of the job performance. And I think absolutely that is an essential attribute that comes from not only, being in combat because of the dynamic nature of that environment, but also because regulations are shifting and there's a lot of mobility and a lot of movement. So adaptability and flexibility really is a great strength veterans bring to the workforce. I think maybe, Dean, what you're talking about a little bit differently might be communication style.
Okay. Fair enough. I agree. So let's speak on it from by the way, I'm going to provoke questions, not necessarily mean that I believe in what I'm saying. I want to stimulate discussion. So let's call it communication style. And the style of that ex-military person seems to, for whatever reason, rub others the wrong way. Yeah. What is it that they are feeling, those other people, from that military person that's sometimes hard to connect on?
Well, I think a good way to encapsulate the whole darn thing is my husband, who's a career active Army combat veteran, would say prior to retiring and after retiring, when someone doesn't get to the point, they're just using up good Army oxygen. Isn't that funny? But it describes really how they feel, because efficiency is a key part of our discussion. When we send out emails, in the Army in particular, I was Air Force, come from a different culture. Services have different aptitudes and cultures, right? But in the Army, you're encouraged to write bluff, bottom line up front in your email, so you can get right to the point and figure out what the next step is in the task to get the job done. And so, military people, a myth and misconception is that, we're drill sergeant-like in our communication. Now, depending on the person's job, if you were, maybe military police or maybe special forces, I'm not sure I'm giving the best description, but oftentimes the longer you serve and the more, if you will, hardcore your job was in the military, the more military-like communication styles you will have. Now, what I have to say in response to that is, give that person feedback. Instead of talking about them behind their back, well, they served in the military. Help that person, offer critical, supportive, encouraging feedback. Hey, I know you want to get the job done. We want to get the job done too. But no, when you said this, it kind of came across, such and such. You might want to, be a little slower about, making recommendations, kind of build relationships first, really assess what's going on. And maybe be a little softer in your approach. Employers have told me that they've offered some coaching to workers and done real well. Don't be afraid, because military people are more often than not pretty thick-skinned and used to getting feedback. And then one other quick story: women in particular, I think, struggle with that potential observation, because in my experience, when I interviewed for civilian jobs as a nurse, okay, now a nurse is a nurse, kind of, so to speak, but I was still nervous that, oh, well, they're going to think that because I'm a female in the military working around all these guys, that I might be more bossy or less patient or more direct. And so I really tried to overcompensate based on what I thought they might be thinking by, my body language, my tone of voice, how much I smiled, because I really wanted them to be able to feel like they could connect with me, because sometimes those biases or stereotypes are even, more difficult, for women to overcome. So yes, we have a tendency to be direct, and that works well in the military most of the time, but communication is about hearing and, listening and receiving and sharing, and it needs to be workable for both parties, if you will.
So, given your work, what is the misperception that a lot of us have about the potential of hiring an ex-military person, that your job, your work, your passion is to re-educate us on?
Well, I'm excited to say that there's very little misconception anymore these days. Employers are hiring veterans in record numbers. Veteran unemployment is, 2.1% last I checked. In 2022, for 7 consecutive months, veteran unemployment had been below 3%, noting historic lows within the last, 20 years. Employers understand the business case for hiring veterans. Veteran unemployment is consistently lower than unemployment of civilians. So, since like 2011 or 12, when veteran unemployment was double digits, we've come a long way as a nation to hiring veterans, and there's some effective strategies that are really helping make that happen. Where the rub is still is with underemployment. I've read anywhere from 30 to 60% of veterans hired feel underemployed. Much of this research is still emerging, but the good news is that veterans are getting jobs. Now, it may not be their career-focused job, or they may have to take a step back, but a lot is working really well, Dean.
So I guess the assumption that I made was a wrong assumption, that there is that's great news. So I want to get to a question here, but I'll tell you a story. So we did some work with an organization recently called C4, which stands for Charlie 4, the fourth. Navy SEAL, actually saved a lot of people, did not survive. They created a foundation, and now they have 500 and some odd acres of beautiful land up near the northeast corner of San Diego County, where they bring servicemen and women home to decompress after being in combat for 6 months, and spend time with their families and reintroduce themselves into those families. And I was just, I went out and saw the space. We did a couple of days with them just about 3 weeks ago, and I just fell in love with them. And so what you're doing is similar in vein, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
My question is that I found a fascinating piece here was, at least, again, my perceptions, Kathy, are probably incorrect, but the idea that we needed to make the military more like us, like we want to take some of you and soften you up a little bit. make you a little less direct, change your style a little bit more, so it kind of like homogenize you into the team. You're outside, we're going to bring you in. You're the ex-military, we're going to bring you into the fold, right? So these perceptions, at least that the stuff that I've heard in our organizations we've dealt with over the last 30 years, these are some of the words you hear, right? Maybe it's wrong, but that's just my sense. But what I found, which I was surprised at and delighted for, was the reverse was needed. That I felt that we needed to teach our organizations, our teams, our leaders, the principles and the experience of what it means to be that mission focused, what it means to be that agile, what it means to be that committed to your team that the ex-military has that the rest of us don't. And it just became so starkly clear to me that we needed our ex-military to teach the rest of us versus the other way around.
One of the biggest ways to be successful with veteran hiring is to understand military culture. And that's what I hear you saying, is that employers understand how to, if you will, meet the veteran halfway, to work with their maybe direct communication style or, kind of firm body language or formal body language, just to expect those things and not to try to, not take offense. I mean, it's just like learning any, diverse minority group that's different from you, the language they use, the way they see the world, why they do what they do. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things that's going on in our country right now, is we have more and more sensitivity to helping all different demographics, feel included. So absolutely. Thank you for seeing it through that lens. And the more employers invest in military culture training, which I can certainly provide, the better the more they will succeed with veteran hiring. But, I also want to emphasize how important it is for the job seeker to do their work, to come prepared to, be able to summarize their strengths in a job interview, which is tough for us because we don't self-promote, to have a resume that's not full of alphabet soup and that speaks to the employer, to, really work at minimizing their formal body language during the interview and trying to have small talk. And, it's really a double-edged sword, because our military people don't necessarily come out of the service being really well prepared for the job search process, oftentimes through no fault of their own.
Sure.
But it is their responsibility to come up to speed, to do a good job. But if an employer is more sensitive and understands, if you will, tips and tricks, holy cow, the return on investment for hiring for aptitude and training, for understanding what makes that military person tick, and for putting them in a place where they can flourish is really going to help your workforce.
I was having dinner with this group a few weeks ago, San Diego, right near the base, right? Coronado Island.
Nice. I love that place.
Right? Yeah. You know the spot, right? And so those of you who know Coronado Island, it's a wonderful beach. You got the Dell there, but you've also got the Navy base there as well. The Air Station, yeah.
My dad was a Navy pilot.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a SEALs train there.
Oh, yeah.
And I was sitting down and we're having dinner, and this guy who was a Navy SEAL, he now works for this foundation, he's a board member, was talking about what the Navy SEALs go through in terms of their training. 18 months, if I'm not mistaken, and then 6 months of deployment. And the kinds of activities, let's just say that way, were beyond my imagination, how difficult they had to endure. For example, like 5 days, 5 hours of sleep, and then one thing after another. And the number of people who survive and get chosen are a fraction of those who apply, right? So it's a process of sorting.
Very impressive. Yeah.
Very impressive. Like,
those who make it are incredibly elite, incredibly talented, incredibly strong. I mean, just worthy of incredible amounts of respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then I said, so then how do you do this? How do you make this happen? You've been through it. I was talking to this guy and he says, the only way you could do it is through the support of your buddies.
Nice.
That if you tried to do it off your own willpower, you would never make it.
Yeah.
But it's because you're in that tribe, you're in that family.
Yes.
That's what gets you through. And I
you
thought,
use the word tribe?
I think so.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. And what, to me, it just highlighted, wouldn't that be interesting if we could somehow, without going through that sort of pain and trauma, teach that level of teamwork within organizations? That's why I realized Navy SEALs and ex-military people have a lot to teach the rest of us about teamwork that we just take for granted and we don't have any concept on at that level. So aside from that, what do you think we can learn from ex-military? Those of us who are not, never will be, don't ever plan to be, but we want to learn from those who have something that we don't. What can we learn from all of you?
Well, that level of teamwork is exceptional and extreme because of the stakes involved, and the tribe that is created in combat because of the danger, or the tribe that is created in an extreme elite force because of their highly dangerous, jobs. But I think, some of the things that civilian people can learn is service before self, right? It's in our democracy. And I hate to say it, but seemingly our culture is becoming more and more entitled and more about me. Yeah. And yes, the Bill of Rights and our individual freedoms. I mean, that's what our country is founded on. And that's one of the reasons I'm profoundly grateful to be an American. For pity's sakes, we're so lucky, but we can't take that for granted. And our military people don't. We appreciate freedom. We understand its cost. We're willing to sacrifice for our freedom and sacrifice ourselves and our family if needed. And so, and then integrity, doing what's right. I mean, the values that we must live by when we serve in the military are absolutely essential for us in order to be able to perform the mission. And what your buddy's talking about is, the tribe and the relationships and the trust. I mean, gosh, if we could put the needs of others before ourselves, the needs of our country before ourselves, the needs of our neighbors before ourselves, live that Christian walk or just, do unto others as have you do unto you. I mean, that's the core essence of what military people are all about. And we as a country, I think, would do really well to get back to some of those things and act on in many of those ways and exercise our right to vote, to have our voices heard. All of those things are what, military people do. There was a survey that came out in 2015, the American Enterprise Institute, and said the title of it is Veterans Are Broke No More. And they found that out of 11 criteria of civic contribution, veterans had more civic contributions than civilians. And so that, again, speaks to our service before self and our desire to, volunteer, support charity, vote, be involved in civic causes, be involved in political campaigns. We are civic assets. Not only do we make our workforce stronger, Dean, but when we move into communities, doggone it, we care. We want this to remain the greatest country in the world. So I know that's a lot, but that's a big part of my soapbox.
Oh, good. So our military people primarily one political party over another?
No. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think we, by and large, tend to come from a conservative point of view. However, there are very active military members from the other party. They're saying, by God, don't make that assumption. That is just not true, and that's not right. So we are very diverse, but probably lean more conservative than anything else. But I think that's changing too.
Changing in what way?
Well, changing to, maybe, more appreciation for liberal understandings. I mean, there's a lot of changes going on inside the military right now that aren't necessarily aligned with the conservative viewpoint. And I don't know if I want to get into politics in this conversation, but
it's all right.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the core values of the greatest generation and our Vietnam vets and people who serve, whether they're told to or, most of our force now is an all volunteer force.
Right.
And it's a 50-year experiment that is really working well despite its imperfections. Okay. We have the most professional, the most educated volunteer force that we've ever had. And so there's a lot of reason to be grateful for that. And one other point I think is interesting is that 80% of the volunteer force comes from people like me who grew up in a military family. How about that? And so the military civilian divide continues to widen. For a recent statistic that, during right after World War II, it was like an American, if you knew 70 Americans, you met a World War II vet. But now you have to meet 7,000 Americans to meet an Iraq or Afghanistan vet. And so there's a smaller percentage of us, being responsible for this need. Oh, and by the way, okay, when 3 out of 10 are only eligible to serve because of weight, physical fitness, trouble with the law, or not being able to pass tests, those 3 out of 10 volunteers of our nation, by golly, if they choose to serve and, potentially serve the ultimate sacrifice, or at least their families when they quit serving and hope, don't pay the ultimate sacrifice. Holy cow, don't we as Americans have an obligation, if not an opportunity, to come alongside them and go beyond thank you for our service and really help them get integrated into work and community?
So did this shift right after Vietnam? Because we had so many people came back, obviously not praised.
Yeah.
And then there seems to have been like, okay, now whether you agree with the war they were in or not, we're not going to support our military. And it seemed like there was either an active or subliminal campaign to kind of turn the narrative around that.
Well, I have heard, Dean, that potentially even the Vietnam veterans were instrumental in really changing this dialogue because they didn't want the current warriors to experience what they did. So they probably influenced it. Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I think I'm going to give them some credit, doggone it, those men and women who, did so much and were treated so poorly. And, the other narrative slogan that came out, if you don't support the war, support the warrior. That was a narrative that really stuck. And oh, by the way, I think that the demand for good labor, employers were seeking, good workforce solutions and, understood that the Gallup poll for military trust has always, typically been very high, if not the highest of organizations around the country. And then, 9/11, there was a lot of patriotism and desire to, come together as a country. And so there were a lot of forces. But, what was interesting is, beyond thank you for your service just kind of became very commonplace. And so
I got on a plane a couple of days ago and, Delta Airlines. And of course, those of you who need extra time down the jetway, you're first. And the second is people with kids under the age of 2. And third is our active duty or retired military. And then we got into the first class. So it's now become such a ubiquitous part of all of our communication to say thank you for your service, and it's now commonplace.
It is. And thank you for everybody who participates in that. And and says that it means a lot. And yet there is a great opportunity to go beyond thank you for your service. As I've written in my book, I call it the Veteran Champion Handbook for Civilians, because saying thank you is a first step, but actions always mean more than words. Okay. And the reason I wrote this book is because as the director of community outreach for the Ohio National Guard, we built a statewide outreach program to educate and engage civilians in support of troops and their families in response to 9/11. So I came alongside mostly employers, but then there were lawyers, doctors, community leaders, educators, clergy, leaders of diverse community. And I saw firsthand the joy, satisfaction, and meaning that being a civilian veteran champion brought to the civilians who just had an idea what they could do, who just had a little bit of encouragement, who were just thanked and appreciated for what they do, because this military civilian divide is a gap. And so, the civilians kind of stay on their side, military kind of stays on their side. Well, we need to kind of bridge that gap that understanding. And so the book is full of practical how-tos from wherever you sit in your professional life or in your neighborhood as to what you can do in a meaningful way that will improve quality of life, workforce, and community for not only the veteran, but for the community member, the employer, and the leader of a faith community. There's just so much more that we can do. And I invite everybody who's listening to join the Veteran Champion movement and be a part of the win.
Veteran Champion movement. Say more about that.
There you go. So I define a veteran champion as someone who promotes and builds mutually beneficial activities and services that promote quality of life, workforce, and community. And the premise is no action is too small. Everybody can do something. Not rocket science, it's people science. It's identifying who the military people are in your neighborhood, at work, in your faith community, and saying thank you, building trusting relationships, and doing more. It's really that simple.
Kathy, how did you get into this? I mean, a lot of people come out of the military and, do other things. What got you down this path? I mean, it must have been something. Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Navy family, following my dad's career around the globe. Went to a French-speaking preschool in Paris, France, graduated from high school in Iceland, went to college in Munich, Germany. Before the age of 35, I lived in at least 20 different communities. I was a nurse and a public affairs officer. I've had, in 6 different industries, 17 different jobs, and a lot of different things. But when I finally got off active duty and my first husband was ready to get off active duty, we moved to a small community in the Midwest, a town of about 30,000, Lancaster, Ohio. And once I started establishing roots, I was like, wow, my life experience has been really different from the people that I've met here. Okay. Starting with all the moving, starting with the diversity that I wasn't experienced. And then it really hit me when I went to a funeral of a 40-year-old business guy who died in a water ski accident. And I was like, I've never been to a funeral, maybe my grandmother. But when you move so much, I know the people who are struggling, the lady down the street with cancer, you're not that involved in a church so that, you develop longstanding relationships. So that was kind of the first inkling. And then, frankly, I didn't have that many close friends. When you're having a bad day, when you're moving so much, you can call somebody, but it's a whole different thing to be in a community with someone who knows you. You can go, sit on their couch, have a drink and, kind of commiserate together. So
yeah,
that kind of opened my eyes. And then when I had the opportunity at the 121st Air Refueling Wing in Columbus, Ohio, to build a mission-driven community relations program after 9/11 to engage employers on our national security team so that they felt like that their point of view and their participation was recognized and appreciated. The commander of the Ohio National Guard recognized the goodness that we were doing there in Columbus, and we took it statewide. And then I witnessed these civilian veteran champions who were absolutely thrilled to do more. I mean, listen to how you described your experience at C4. You had a lot of pride. You had a lot of, wow, this is so cool. I mean, that's how most civilians feel, but they don't know what to do or how to really support. And so that was my job. I taught civilians how to understand military people better, and we created strategies and implemented them. And so when I retired, I was like, there's just so much more work to do. Nobody's really doing this purposefully in our country, which is a huge myth. Okay. We've got 45,000 nonprofits who are doing great work, but who's out there actually identifying, encouraging, and recommending next steps for you, for instance, Dean? Okay, now that you've been to C4, Dean, and you really love that program, how could you take what you've learned about veterans, what you've learned from this conversation, how could you become a civilian veteran champion, and what could you do next to improve the quality of life of a veteran or someone in your community, at work, or faith community? I mean, these are questions I ask people all the time. Could you connect them to a prospective employer? Could you invite them to your book club? Could you invite them to church? Could you be aware of when someone's deploying and go over and knock on the door and, offer to help the remaining spouse? I mean, there's just so much you can do, but if you're not thinking about it, you don't have that awareness. You think, oh, okay,
Truly.
the VA is taking care of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? That's not my problem. Oh, absolutely wrong. The VA has enough to deal with, and we need the support of every single citizen to bring that military family all the way back home, integrate them into the community, help them find a job that's a career opportunity that pays the bills, that's satisfying, and to help them heal in ways that you're comfortable. And, that's faith community stuff we can talk about later if we have time.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, that's going to be our next podcast. We've already decided that we're going to do another one.
Let's do it.
This is great. So aside from the book, which I just ordered, and I'm going to get one for myself and get one for this on Amazon.
On Amazon.
How else can people connect with you, Kathy?
I would like to offer you some show notes, and I'm offering employers a veteran-ready assessment for free, and an introductory call or consultative call, discovery call. I'll provide a link for that. And my website is vanguardveteran.com, vanguardveteran.com, LLC, or my email is Kathy with a K and a Y at vanguardveteran.com.
Well, as redundant as this may sound, and without stealing the title of your book, please let me tell you, thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
In all shapes and forms.
Have you heard people say you're worth it? That's one response service members give to people who say that.
Ooh.
That's super cool. The other thing you want to...
Ooh, that gets you right here.
It does. It does. I mean, and I probably wouldn't say that because I'm not a combat veteran, but it would be okay if I did. But combat veterans do say that. The other thing I would encourage you to consider is instead of saying thank you for your service, consider saying thank you for wearing the uniform. Because just like that hit you when I said you're worth it, when you say that to me, that hits me right there because that implies to me that you understand what wearing the uniform is all about. And I'm actually getting goosebumps right now, even talking about this, Dean.
Okay. Because
wearing that uniform is about those values. It's about serving your country. It's about your brothers and sisters. It's about having integrity. It's about everything that our country embodies, So think about that as another way to...
I didn't know that was that important, but thank you. That's great. I will remember that.
You bet.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time, Kathy. It's been a real delight.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.